To all civilizations, beware of Earth. We thought them weak. We thought them primitive. We were wrong. The message cuts through space, reaching every empire, every ruler. Planets once at war pause, united by fear. The name humanity now carries a dark legend. A species that defied the laws of war, rewriting history with sheer will and destruction. What did humans do to strike terror into the hearts of the universe? What war turned them into the most feared force in the galaxy? Stay till the end to find out. Darkness stretched across the void, silent and infinite. The galaxy had existed for millions of years, civilizations rising and falling like the tides of a forgotten sea. Empires flourished, their fleets soaring through the cold abyss, claiming planets, waging wars, and writing their names into the stars. Yet, for all their power, all their wisdom, one truth now united them, a single, undeniable fear: humanity. They were latecomers to the galactic stage, a species that should have remained insignificant, a race bound to a tiny blue planet, fragile and unremarkable. The great empires had watched them grow, had seen them reach for the stars with clumsy hands, stumbling into the vast unknown. They had laughed at their primitive ways, their reckless ambition. No one was laughing now. It had started like any other conquest. The Zilari Dominion, a ruthless empire stretching across countless systems, had seen Earth as nothing more than another planet to conquer, a new species to enslave. They had done this before, 1,000 times over. Planets burned, species bowed. Resistance was crushed beneath their monstrous war machines. Humanity would be no different, or so they thought. The first attack was swift. Zilari ships descended from the void, blotting out the sky, their weapons turning cities into ash. Earth's defenses crumbled in days. Humanity should have surrendered. Every other species had. Every other species had begged for mercy, offering their worlds, their futures, their very souls. But not the humans. Something inside them refused to break. The galaxy had never seen a species like them. Fragile, yes. Short-lived, certainly. But within them burned something terrifying. An unyielding fire, a madness that no empire had ever encountered. When other species lost their homeworlds, they scattered. When their armies fell, they surrendered. But when Earth burned, humanity did not flee. They did not kneel. They evolved. They had no grand fleets, no ancient weapons of destruction, no planetary shields or advanced technology. What they had was desperation. And desperation, as the galaxy would soon learn, was more powerful than any weapon. The war that followed was unlike anything in history. Humans did not fight for land or resources. They fought with a rage, a ferocity that defied logic. They did not just adapt. They became the storm. They turned their dead cities into fortresses. They scavenged the ruins of their fallen world, twisting enemy weapons into new horrors. They fought with fire in their hearts, with bloodied hands, and with a terrifying disregard for their own survival. The Zilari called them monsters. They whispered of human soldiers who would crawl through the wreckage, broken and burned, still moving, still fighting. Warriors who should have been dead, but refused to stop. And then came the greatest horror of all. The humans learned. They stole technology, reverse-engineered ships, and built weapons that should have taken centuries to master. They hacked into enemy systems, turned the Zilari's own ships against them. The galaxy watched in shock as a species that should have perished instead conquered the impossible. The war dragged on. The Zilari grew desperate. They deployed their greatest weapons, planet-destroying beams, biological plagues, AI-driven armies. Nothing worked, because humans did not fear death. They welcomed it. They became the first species to sacrifice entire fleets in suicide attacks. They detonated their own planets rather than let them be taken. They poisoned entire star systems, ensuring if they could not have them, no one would. The Zilari were no longer conquerors. They were prey. The day finally came when the human fleet, once laughable, once weak, reached the Zilari homeworld. The galaxy watched in stunned horror as Earth's battered makeshift warships darkened the sky of the once mighty empire. No demands were made. No offers of surrender were given. Humanity had been shown no mercy. They returned the favor. Zilari Prime burned. The once mighty empire crumbled, its rulers begging for their lives. The war that had begun as an easy conquest had turned into the greatest defeat in galactic history. And the message was clear. Humanity would never bow. Across the galaxy, the silence was deafening. The other empires, once so confident, so arrogant, now faced a terrifying truth. They had laughed at Earth. They had mocked its people. Now they feared them, and in the endless darkness of space, a new legend was born. The war that made the galaxy fear humanity forever had only just begun. The war that turned humanity into the galaxy's greatest terror had begun with arrogance. The Zilari Dominion had seen Earth as nothing more than another primitive world, a planet ripe for conquest. But they had underestimated something far more dangerous than technology or numbers. They had underestimated the human soul. The first wave of invasion had been brutal, swift, and devastating. Earth's defenses crumbled in mere days. Cities turned to ash. Skies burned red. Billions died in fire and rubble. The Zilari had seen this before. They knew the pattern. Conquer, enslave, assimilate. The universe always bent to those with the most power. But humanity was different. At first, the Zilari didn't notice. The resistance was expected. Every species fought back briefly before collapsing under the weight of war. But this was not resistance. This was something else. Something they could not explain. Captured soldiers spat in their captors' faces instead of begging for mercy. Wounded humans, with broken limbs and failing organs, still fought, clawing at their enemies with bare hands. Civilians, instead of fleeing, turned entire cities into death traps. The more the Zilari pushed, the more ferocious humanity became. This was not how war was supposed to work. The first true moment of horror came when the Zilari occupied New Moscow. They expected surrender, submission, compliance. Instead, the city vanished in a mushroom cloud. The humans destroyed their own city rather than let it fall. No species had ever done this before. The Zilari, for the first time in their long, ruthless history, felt something new, a feeling alien to them, a feeling that made their cold blood run colder. Fear. It started as whispers among the ranks. These creatures are not like the others. The Zilari commanders ignored the warnings, but then something happened that no one could deny. Humanity learned. They adapted at a terrifying speed, captured alien technology, which should have taken decades to understand, was reverse-engineered in weeks. Their primitive weapons were upgraded overnight. Their military strategy, once chaotic and undisciplined, evolved into something precise, calculated, relentless. And then came the message that would haunt the galaxy forever. A transmission, intercepted by the Zilari High Command. A human general, bloodied but unbowed, staring into the camera. His voice was calm, cold, unwavering. You came to conquer. You came to destroy. You thought we would kneel. He leaned forward. You don't understand what you've awakened. The message was clear. The Zilari had not invaded a species. They had provoked a force of nature. Desperation turned into innovation. Factories built war machines at an impossible rate. Refugees became soldiers overnight. Entire planets, once peaceful, became fortresses of vengeance. And then came the first true counterattack. A single Zilari battleship, patrolling the outer colonies, was destroyed in a way that should have been impossible. Human ships, crude and underpowered, should have stood no chance against the Dominion's might. But they had done more than just fight. They had hunted. The Zilari crew had been slaughtered, their bodies left floating in space. The humans didn't just kill. They sent a message. We are coming. Panic spread through the Zilari Dominion. Reports flooded in, entire fleets disappearing in the dark void. Supply lines cut overnight. The humans fought without mercy, without hesitation, without fear. The galaxy had made a mistake. They had assumed that because humans were fragile, they were weak. That because they bled, they would break. That because they were new to the stars, they did not know how to wage war. But war had been carved into their history, written in their blood, passed down through generations. The Zilari had waged conquest for thousands of years. Humanity had been forged by it. The realization came too late. The war that was supposed to be over in days stretched into months, then years. The galaxy watched in stunned horror as the unthinkable happened. The humans were not just surviving, they were winning. And with every battle, the truth became clear. This was no ordinary war. This was the war that would make the galaxy fear humanity forever. The galaxy had never feared Earth. It had barely noticed it. A backwater planet, lost in the spiral arms of a minor star system, populated by a species too young, too reckless, too fragile to matter. The Zilari Dominion had seen many such worlds before. Conquering them was routine. A single war fleet was enough to reduce an entire civilization to ash. It was never personal, just another conquest, another planet to be absorbed into their ever-expanding empire. And so, when the decision was made to claim Earth, it was met with nothing but cold indifference. The invasion was planned, executed, and expected to be over in mere days. It should have been easy. It was not. The first wave of Zilari ships entered Earth's orbit with precision, blotting out the sky. Their engines burned bright against the black void, their cannons glowing with charged plasma. This was how it always began. Orbital bombardment. Fire rained down from the heavens, scorching cities, turning entire landscapes into wastelands. Millions perished in the first hours. The Zilari watched the destruction unfold, expecting immediate surrender. But there was none. Not a single message of surrender. Not a single plea for mercy. Instead, as the dust settled, something else emerged. Resistance. Humans did not scatter. They did not kneel. They fought, with weapons outdated by centuries, with strategies born from ancient wars, with a savagery that made no sense. The Zilari were confused. Why would a species fight when their defeat was certain? Why would they resist when the odds were so hopeless? It didn't matter. Their orders were clear. Crush all opposition. Make them bow. And so, they descended. The first real battle happened over what had once been Washington, D.C. The Zilari ground forces landed in precision formations, armored walkers stepping over the ruins of human cities. Drones scouted ahead, scanning for survivors. Then the first explosion came, then the second. then 100 more. The rubble had been wired with explosives. As Zilari soldiers moved through the city, entire buildings collapsed around them, trapping them in fire and steel. Snipers picked off commanders from the shadows. Small human squads, outgunned and outmatched, struck from the ruins and vanished before they could be countered. Zilari blood stained the streets. This was not war as the Dominion knew it. There were no battle lines, no clear engagements, no surrender. Humanity fought like cornered wolves, with no regard for their own survival. They did not fight for victory. They fought for vengeance, and it terrified the invaders. The Zilari sent more troops, more machines, more firepower. Entire cities were razed. Still, the humans refused to submit. Then came the unthinkable. The Zilari had taken control of Earth's communication networks. They expected desperation. They expected cries for help. Instead, they intercepted a message. Not one of surrender, one of defiance. We are not alone. We have never been alone. You think you've invaded our home? Number, you've only locked yourself inside with us. It was madness, arrogance, a message that no species should have dared to send. Yet behind those words, behind the static and the broken signals, there was something terrifying, conviction. The war escalated, the Zilari, growing frustrated, unleashed their full might. They deployed orbital cannons that could split mountains. They poisoned rivers. They darkened the skies. And yet, the humans kept fighting. They adapted. They built weapons from the wreckage of Zilari ships. They hijacked enemy drones, turning them against their creators. They didn't care about rules of engagement. They fought dirty, using deception, sabotage, and raw, unrelenting brutality. And the galaxy watched in horror. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Every other species that faced the Zilari had surrendered, broken, accepted their fate. But not the humans. They refused. They turned every defeat into a lesson, every loss into fuel for their rage, every battle into a nightmare for the Zilari. And then, the first Zilari homeworld fell, not a colony, not an outpost, an actual homeworld. A place that had never known war, never known fear, suddenly found itself under siege by the very species it had tried to exterminate. Humanity didn't just fight back. They invaded. They turned Zilari technology against them. They hacked their defenses, disrupted their fleets, and struck without warning. This was no longer a war. This was revenge. And as the Zilari Empire trembled, as their leaders realized what they had awakened, a final message was broadcast across the galaxy. A human voice, calm, cold. You started this war. A pause, but we will finish it. The war that was meant to be over in days had turned into something far worse, something that would haunt the galaxy for eternity. The war that made the galaxy fear humanity forever had truly begun. The Zilari had made a fatal mistake. They thought they were crushing an inferior species. They believed Earth was nothing more than another conquest, another footnote in their long history of domination. But what they failed to understand, what they could never have predicted, was that humanity was different. They did not fight like other species. They did not surrender like other species. They did not fear like other species. And now, the war they had started would become their greatest nightmare. The ruins of Earth smoldered under a sky thick with ash. Cities had been reduced to skeletal remains. Entire continents carved apart by orbital bombardment. The Zilari walked through the wreckage with cold efficiency, believing the battle was won. But they had only won the first strike. Deep beneath the ruined streets, hidden within the crumbling husks of skyscrapers, humanity was not defeated. They were waiting, watching, learning. Then, without warning, the Zilari's own supply lines began to vanish. Ships that should have arrived with reinforcements were never heard from again. Entire convoys were lost to the void. The Zilari sent search teams, expecting mechanical failures or simple navigation errors. What they found instead were floating graveyards, warships torn apart from the inside. Survivors, if there were any, told the same terrifying story. Humans had boarded their vessels. They moved in silence, slipping through the ventilation shafts, crawling through the wiring tunnels, striking from the darkness. They took control of enemy weapons, turned security systems against their own soldiers, and worst of all, they left no one alive. The Zilari were not used to fear. They had ruled for centuries, their empire expanding without challenge. But now, they faced something that defied reason. Humanity was supposed to be weak, yet here they were, striking with terrifying precision, cutting off the Zilari's lifeline, bleeding their forces dry one ship at a time. Desperation set in. The Zilari launched search and destroy operations across the occupied territories. They deployed hunter drones, scanning for any signs of human resistance. They executed captured prisoners, hoping to break their spirit. It only made things worse, because every human they killed only made the survivors fight harder. Every city they burned became a tomb for their own soldiers. Every battle they thought they won was only the beginning of another nightmare. The humans were no longer just resisting, they were hunting. One by one, the Zilari outposts on Earth fell silent. At first, High Command assumed technical failures. Then, they sent scouting teams. None returned. Finally, they sent an entire battalion, 1,000 heavily armed soldiers, battle-hardened warriors who had conquered countless worlds. They entered the ruins of New London. They never came out. Days later, a Zilari general received a message on his private comlink, a grainy, distorted video file. He played it, his 4 eyes narrowing as the screen flickered to life. A room. Dark. Blood-stained. A single Zilari soldier sat in the center, trembling, his armor cracked, his breathing ragged. His eyes darted toward the camera, filled with something no Zilari had ever seen before. Terror. They don't stop, he whispered, his voice barely audible. They should be dead. They should be broken. A pause, a ragged breath. Then the last words he would ever speak. But they don't die. They keep coming. The screen cut to black. The war had changed. This was no longer a simple conquest, no longer a military campaign. This was something else, something primal, something the Zilari had never encountered. Their forces were now afraid to patrol the cities they had destroyed. They hesitated before entering human territory. They jumped at shadows. The most elite of their warriors, undefeated across the stars, began making mistakes. Their formations slipped. Their discipline faltered. They shot at ghosts, because they knew. Somewhere out there, watching, waiting. The humans were coming for them. Then came the final, undeniable proof that the war had turned against them. It happened in the dead of night, in the Zilari's own occupied headquarters on Earth. Their supreme commander, the architect of the invasion, was found dead. His body was discovered hanging from the shattered remains of a human skyscraper, his throat slit, his weapons untouched. No alarms had been triggered. No cameras had captured the intruder. All that remained was a message, carved into the steel walls of the command center. You started this. Now we finish it. Panic turned into collapse. The Zilari could not fight an enemy that refused to die. They could not conquer a species that had no fear. They had believed that humanity was just another weak race to be subjugated. But what they had failed to understand was this: humans don't lose wars, they survive them. And when they rise from the ashes, they do not return as victims, they return as executioners. The war that was meant to last days had now dragged into months. The Zilari had thrown everything they had at Earth. And yet, despite all their firepower, all their strategies, all their overwhelming strength, they were the ones who were losing. Because humanity had transformed into something terrifying. A species that refused to die. A species that adapted faster than any force in the universe. A species that, when pushed to the brink, did not surrender. They evolved, and the galaxy would never be the same again. The war had reached its breaking point. The Zilari had thrown everything they had at humanity: fire, steel, and terror. They had turned Earth into a graveyard, convinced that no species could survive such destruction. But humanity had not only survived, they had learned. They had adapted, evolved, and turned the tide in ways no one could have imagined. The Zilari Empire had begun to fracture, their forces stretched thin, their confidence crumbling. And now, as the final battle loomed on the horizon, the entire galaxy watched in silent horror. This was no longer a war of conquest. It was a war for survival. And for the first time in Zilari history, they were the ones fighting for their lives. The battle began in the ruins of Moscow, a city that had once been the beating heart of a nation. Now it was nothing more than a battlefield of fire and rubble, a place where the dead outnumbered the living. The Zilari had chosen this as their stronghold, the last place on Earth they truly controlled. From here they had planned to regroup, to launch one final strike to crush the human resistance. But the humans had different plans. The attack began with silence. No alarms, no warning, just shadows moving through the ruins. Zilari soldiers, trained to expect massive frontal assaults, were taken completely off guard. Their outposts were wiped out in minutes. Hacked defense systems, snipers in the dark, bombs hidden in the wreckage of their own war machines. Panic spread like wildfire. The Zilari commanders screamed for reinforcements, but none came. Because at that very moment, something unthinkable was happening. Human warships appeared in the sky. It should have been impossible. Humanity had no fleet. They had been a primitive race, barely stepping beyond their own moon before the Zilari arrived. They had never built interstellar warships, never commanded great armadas. And yet, there they were. A fleet of captured Zilari warships, repurposed, rebuilt, and crewed by human hands. The same ships that had once rained destruction upon Earth now turned their cannons toward their former masters. The Zilari fleet, still in orbit, barely had time to react. Their own ships, confused by familiar signals, hesitated. That hesitation cost them everything. Humanity's first true space battle lasted only 37 minutes. In that time, half the Zilari fleet was obliterated. The other half ran. For the first time in history, they ran. The unthinkable had happened. Humanity had taken the war beyond Earth. And now, the real battle had begun. On the ground, the chaos only grew. With their air support gone, the Zilari forces in Moscow found themselves surrounded. But this was not a traditional siege. There were no battle lines, no clear front. There was only fear. Zilari soldiers reported movements in the shadows, whispers in the wind, eyes watching from the ruins. They fired wildly into the darkness, their weapons glowing in the night. But they weren't fighting an army anymore. They were fighting ghosts. And then the ghosts struck back. The first explosion shattered the Zilari command center. Fire erupted through the ruins, sending alien bodies flying. The second explosion took out their primary weapons cache. Their own munitions turned against them. Then came the attacks. Humans moving like predators, striking and vanishing before the Zilari could react. They fought with stolen energy rifles, with makeshift explosives, with blades coated in Zilari blood. They did not fight to win. They fought to annihilate. Every Zilari soldier knew in that moment that there would be no mercy. Because humanity had learned something from their enemy. No species deserves mercy when it comes to war. By dawn, the Zilari stronghold was gone. What had once been an impenetrable fortress was now nothing more than smoldering rubble. The last Zilari survivors tried to surrender. The humans did not accept it. They remembered the executions, the massacres, the screams of their children as their cities burned. They remembered everything. And so, the Zilari were wiped out to the last soldier. Moscow, once a symbol of destruction, became something else. A message. Not just to the Zilari, but to the entire galaxy. The war had turned. The Zilari, once the rulers of 1,000 worlds, had now suffered a defeat unlike any before. And humanity had proven something terrifying. They were not just survivors. They were conquerors. The message spread across the stars faster than any fleet. Other civilizations, once too afraid to challenge the Zilari, now watched Earth with a mixture of awe and fear. Because they knew what was coming next. Humanity was no longer content to defend. Now they were coming for revenge. And the galaxy had never been more afraid. The galaxy had seen wars before. Empires had risen and fallen. Civilizations had fought for survival. Battles had been waged across countless stars. But nothing had ever been like this. The war with humanity had started as a simple conquest. The Zilari had believed they would add Earth to their growing empire with little resistance. They had expected surrender. They had expected fear. But what they got instead was vengeance. And now, as the final battle loomed, they realized the truth too late. This was not just a fight for survival anymore. This was humanity's reckoning. The last remnants of the Zilari Empire gathered in the skies above their homeworld, Zelos Prime. This was their fortress, their throne, the heart of their dominion. No enemy had ever dared to bring war to its gates, until now. The human fleet arrived in silence. No grand speeches, no threats, just the inevitable. Captured Zilari warships, now under human command, led the charge. Their hulls were scarred from battle, their weapons forged in the fires of vengeance. Behind them, an armada unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Ships built in secret, in the depths of stolen shipyards, by the hands of a species that refused to die. The Zilari fleet, once feared across the stars, now stood frozen. Because they knew. Humanity did not come for negotiations. They came to end this. The battle began with a storm of fire. Human warships cut through enemy lines, tearing apart Zilari defenses with brutal efficiency. Their strategies were unlike anything the Zilari had ever encountered. Unpredictable, relentless, merciless. The Zilari commanders screamed for order. They ordered counterattacks, flanking maneuvers, desperate charges. But none of it mattered, because humanity had learned. They had learned how to turn the Zilari's own tactics against them. They had learned how to exploit every weakness. They had learned how to win. Within hours, the Zilari fleet was in chaos. Their warships, once invincible, now burned in the void. Escape pods flooded the system, cowards trying to flee the inevitable, but there would be no escape. Not this time. Then came the final strike. Humanity had not forgotten what had been done to them, the slaughter of their people, the destruction of their world. They had not forgotten the screams of the innocent, the bodies left in the rubble, the billions of lives erased without mercy. And so, they returned the favor. The first wave of bombers descended upon Zelos Prime like an unrelenting storm. They rained fire upon the cities, reducing monuments of Zilari supremacy to nothing but ash. Military outposts, command centers, war factories, obliterated in moments. Zilari citizens, once arrogant, once believing themselves untouchable, fled in terror. But there was nowhere left to run. Human ground forces landed in the ruins of the Zilari capital. They moved without hesitation, executing enemy soldiers, tearing down the last symbols of the empire that had tried to erase them. And then, in the heart of the fallen capital, they found him. The supreme overlord of the Zilari Empire, the architect of Earth's destruction, the monster who had once ordered the annihilation of billions without a second thought, the great ruler of the most feared empire in the galaxy. Now nothing more than a trembling creature, cowering behind his guards. His final words were not of defiance, not of dignity, not even of regret. They were a whisper. Please. A single gunshot echoed through the ruins. The supreme overlord of the Zilari Empire was dead, and with him, his empire fell. The war was over. Humanity had done the impossible. They had not only survived, they had won, and the galaxy had watched every second of it. No one could deny the truth anymore. The species they had once dismissed as weak, primitive, and insignificant had just wiped an empire off the face of the universe, and they had done it with terrifying precision. The message was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated. Humanity was not to be challenged. Humanity was not to be conquered. Because if anyone dared to try again, they would suffer the same fate as the Zilari: extinction. And from that day forward, the galaxy did not just respect humanity. It feared them. Silence. For the first time in years, the galaxy was silent. No alarms, no war cries, no desperate screams. The Zilari Empire was gone. What had once been the most feared force in the universe had been reduced to dust. Their fleets destroyed, their cities leveled, their leaders executed without mercy. The great conquerors had become nothing more than a memory, and at the center of it all, standing amidst the wreckage of a fallen civilization, was humanity. Victorious, but forever changed. The war had cost humanity everything: their home, their families, their very sense of innocence. The people who had once looked to the stars with wonder now looked at them with warning. They had become something new, something unstoppable. The surviving soldiers walked through the ruins of Zelos Prime, their faces emotionless, their weapons still warm from battle. They had won, but victory did not feel like celebration. It felt like justice. One soldier, covered in the dust of destruction, knelt on the shattered ground and picked up a small piece of metal, a fragment of an old Zilari war medal, a symbol of an empire that had once ruled with an iron fist. Now, it was nothing but scrap. He closed his fist around it and whispered under his breath, "Never again." And he meant it. The galaxy had changed that day. Every surviving species, races that had once cowered before the Zilari, now looked upon humanity with a new kind of fear. They had not just won a war. They had done something no other species had ever done. They had turned conquerors into corpses. Whispers spread like wildfire. The name human no longer meant weakness. It no longer meant a primitive, fragile race waiting to be enslaved. It meant something else. It meant retribution. It meant power. It meant that no empire was safe. And yet, as the fires of war slowly faded, humanity did not claim the Zilari homeworld as their own. They left. They took nothing. No spoils, no planets, no trophies, because they had never fought for conquest. They had fought to end conquest. As the last human warship disappeared into the stars, the galaxy held its breath. What would they do next? Would they rise and build an empire of their own? Would they strike down the next civilization that dared to challenge them? No one knew. And that uncertainty was far more terrifying than any war. Because if humanity could destroy the greatest empire in the galaxy and simply walk away, then what else were they capable of? Back on Earth, or what was left of it, the survivors began rebuilding. The scars of war would never fully heal, but they did not break. They built stronger cities, stronger defenses, stronger minds, because they knew the truth now. The universe was not kind. It was not fair. It was not forgiving. And neither were they. A monument was raised in the ruins of what was once New York City, a massive tower of steel and stone reaching towards the sky. At its base, a simple inscription, written in every language spoken by humankind. We remember, we endure, we prevail. It was not a message to humanity. It was a message to the galaxy. A warning, a promise never again. So, what happens next? No one knows. Maybe humanity will vanish into the darkness, leaving behind only legends of the war that made the galaxy tremble. Maybe they will rise again, not as conquerors, but as something far greater, a force no empire would ever dare to challenge. One thing, however, is certain. The universe will never forget the day it learned to fear humanity. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe.